Can you prove God's existence based upon the existence of the laws of logic? If you say yes, you can absolutely do that, then you probably like a modified form of the Transcendental Argument. Okay, so right off the bat, the Transcendental Argument is an argument that has been made popular by Cornelius Van Til and John Frame, and I really don't like the way that they formulate this argument at all. I think it's an overreach. I think it is something that atheists have rightly pushed back upon, because what it does is it indicates that the laws of logic can't exist unless you specifically have a triune God, like the God of the Bible, Jesus, Trinity, etc. I think that's a major overreach. I'm not a fan. However, the Transcendental Argument did not really, in my opinion, start with Van Til. Instead, Van Til kind of modified it from a version of how you would see some of the reformers like John Calvin and Luther, how they kind of presented some of their thoughts. I would argue this argument stems all the way back from, well, Augustine, and even earlier than that. So we're talking earlier than 300 AD. I think this argument has implicitly existed in some form or another all the way back to when the laws of logic are first talked about, even past Aristotle. And I'm going to explain why that is. I'm going to explain why I don't like a certain formulation that has been popular, and why I think my formulation is a whole lot more accurate and a whole lot more useful. And remember, I'm just trying to prove God exists, and omnipotent being exists. At no point in this argument, or many of the other arguments that I've presented thus far, have I specifically tried to prove that the Christian God is the one and only true God, or whatever else. That's way on down the road. We're just sticking with the question, does an omnipotent being exist? And can I demonstrate through logical necessity, in fact the existence of logic itself, that he must exist? Seems like a pretty tall order if you ask me. Let's give it a shot. So when you take the laws of logic, there are lots of laws of logic. Let's just take two of the biggest, easiest ones that you'll kind of find as foundational for all things, pretty much in thought and science and, well, anything, mathematics. You have the law of identity, and you have the law of contradiction, sometimes called the law of non-contradiction. I just call it the law of contradiction just because it's easier, but you can call it either one, it's fine. So the law of identity is, you might call it common sense, but it's actually very important. Like if you don't have this law, if this law is not valid, well, we might as well just stop talking, stop doing anything, stop existing, just all of it, just stop. Because everything falls apart at that point. So the law of identity simply says, something is what it is. It is not what it is not. And that really doesn't sound all that profound, to be honest. It sounds like, duh, congratulations, you can think. Well, yes, but at the same time, this is vitally important. So for instance, if I say I am me, I am not something other than me. Well, that's important. Can you imagine if I could be me and not me at the same time? Granted, I'm moving a little bit into the law of non-contradiction, sneak peek, but you get the idea. Could I be a human being and a cat at the same time and at the same way? No. And if that was possible, then we'd have some problems. Now, mind you, if I'm writing in English class, or if I am writing poetry, or if I am doing song lyrics or whatnot, many of these people have made a living on doing things that really don't make a lot of logical sense, but that's because they're communicating something artistic, something that can't be communicated through words specifically, and the precision of language does not value accuracy. The precision of language values the evoking of meaning, the evoking of some sort of an aesthetic sort of sense or sensibility. So they're playing by different rules. That's fine. Love music, love art, love all of it. And so you have to know kind of what genre and what you're trying to do. All right, so law of contradiction, I've kind of given you a little bit of sneak peek as the law of identity blurs into that a little bit in my explanation. But the law of contradiction, or sometimes called law of non-contradiction, it boils down to this. Something cannot be true and not true at the same time and in the same respect. Again, sounds pretty simple. Like, it can't be true that I have a camera and not true that I have a camera at the same time and in the same respect. Now, I could have a camera and not have a camera, depending upon how you define camera. even at the same time. But the in the same respect is the big key to that. So you can get away with a whole lot of little tweaks in the definition and what you mean by whatever. It's right up until you get to at the same time and in the same respect. If you leave out time, that also could kind of change things. So for instance, I have a camera. I do not have a camera. Well, I could have a camera at the first statement, and then it's out of my possession by the second statement, in which case contradictory statements are true because time makes them not contradictory. So you got to be careful with the law of contradiction. It has to be absolute contradiction between the two statements. And then the law applies and says, no, you can't have both. It's either true or not true at the same time and in the same respect. You can't really violate that. What's really fun is when people try and get around this argument by flat out denying the law of contradiction and saying, well, it's not always true. But the irony of that is when you say that law is not always true, you just made a truth statement that relies upon the law of contradiction in order for your statement to even have meaning, thereby disproving yourself. In other words, you can't be right. By saying such a thing, you're either being sarcastic or you're just flat out not right by default. Yeah, it's really that simple. And really that's silly when people try and deny it. So anyway, so this question of the law of contradiction or the law of identity or just the laws of logic in general, these absolute foundational laws, the way the transcendental argument moves forward, it's a very clever and interesting way of doing it, but it's really getting at the question of the nature of these laws and why do they exist? What are they? What could make them exist, or do they even exist in any kind of meaningful way? So to go through this argument, I'm first going to kind of give us the kind of a short written form of it, and then I'm going to try and walk us through the thought process of this and why I think this argument is awesome. So let's start off point number 1. The law of contradiction, and here I've shortened it to LOC because, well, it's not LONC, law of non-contradiction, it's law of contradiction. Anyway, laws of logic will often be LOL, and whatever. All right. So the law of contradiction is obeyed by reality and all things in it. Sometimes we'll get a little tripped up on this particular statement. The law of contradiction is obeyed by all things, or reality itself, like the universe, all of it, is obeying the law of contradiction. Well, the reason that shouldn't be a really troublesome statement or questionable statement to people is because if it's not following the law of contradiction, first, why would you be even thinking? Why would you be doing science? Why would you be doing math? Why would you be doing anything if the law of contradiction did not apply to everything? So it applies to everything. Just it has to. And if you try and deny that, you have to employ it in order to deny it, thereby disproving yourself. So that sounds kind of silly. So this first point really shouldn't be contentious, but the point at which where it gets contentious is where it says all of reality obeys the law of contradiction. See, a lot of times you'll see an issue where someone will point out, what do you mean it obeys the law of contradiction? It's not like some sort of a law that exists out there and the universe goes, all right, what's the law say? Okay, the law says this, therefore I have to do that. They would say it's not necessarily that it's obeying or disobeying or any of that kind of stuff. Instead, the universe has a nature. The universe operates, it exists, it does its thing because it just simply has a nature. We happen to have discerned that as the law of contradiction, the laws of logic. Okay, I'll come back to that point, but let's make it through the rest of the argument and then we'll kind of see how this works out. So point number 2. Humans cannot account for the existence of the laws of logic, for it affects all things before humans came into existence. I would add to that, and if humans ever stop existing, it still affects all things. All of reality seems to obey it. Again, the does it obey it question, we'll come back to that. Point number 3. The universe cannot account for the existence of the laws of logic, or the law of contradiction, for the universe obeys the law of contradiction. In the subset, you would say the universe cannot both exist and not exist at the same time and in the same respect. And then it moves to point number 4. A multiverse cannot account for the laws of contradiction or laws of logic, for it would also obey the law of contradiction or laws of logic. Even infinite universes, they would obey, for they cannot be infinite and not infinite at the same time in the same respect. Therefore, there must be some sort of foundation for the laws of logic, and therefore God, we got you. Okay, let me walk through kind of what this looks like at a little bit more of a conversational level, and see if I can make some sense of it. So, maybe I'll put it like as a discussion. So here we go. Theist. Atheist. Yes. So, theist asks, hey atheist, I have a question for you. Ever heard of the laws of logic? Atheist says, well, I have heard of the laws of logic. What about them? Well, the laws of logic are, what are they? I mean, they really, it's laws that, where'd they come from? Because everything seems to obey them. Everything seems to follow them. Nothing can violate it. Nothing at all can violate them. Well, I would say that the laws of logic are stuff we made up. We kind of invented it. It's what we do. We've seen the universe and we just kind of said, well, it operates this way, so it looks like the laws are just simply a description of how the universe operates. Yeah, I'm not sure I buy that. Oh, really? Why not? Why wouldn't you suggest that? Or why wouldn't you believe that? I mean, isn't that the only thing that makes sense? No, it's not really something that makes sense because last I checked, they existed before we existed. They'll exist after we exist. Well, yes, I'm not saying humans like invented these laws or something. They're just simply a description of how the universe operates, right? But I'm still having a problem because, well, the universe kind of obeys them. It's not something where the universe just simply has a nature and it's described as that. Because, well, isn't the universe's nature like always changing? I mean, and stuff always moving around, and wouldn't you expect everything to be different in different locations? Everything, laws of logic just kind of formed as the nature formed? Well, no, it's kind of like a standard for the whole thing. It's start to finish, it's always been kind of static in that. Right, but the universe isn't static. I know that, but the laws are. The laws are kind of fixed. But why are the laws fixed? I'm not understanding this. And in fact, can the universe exist and not exist at the same time and in the same respect? I mean, would that even make sense? No, the universe either exists or it doesn't exist. That's not... Why are you asking me these questions? This is stupid. Like, no, the universe cannot exist and exist at the same time in the same respect. That's my point. In other words, aren't the laws of logic, like the law of contradiction, still true even if there is no universe? If there's no universe, there's nothing. So no, laws of contradiction wouldn't exist if there was nothing. But see, I still have to ask you the question, if there's nothing, can there be something at the same time in the same respect? No, if there's nothing, there's nothing. Like no space, no time, no nothing. Right. Can there be nothing and something at the same time and in the same respect? No. So if the universe didn't exist and there was nothing, the law of contradiction, the laws of logic, would still be true. Because you can't have something and nothing at the same time in the same respect. Okay, I see where you're going with this. This is stupid. Why are you... No. Okay, well, if you had a multiverse, if there were multiple universes and things of that nature, then technically things still exist. And the laws of logic are just products of all of these multiverses, all summed together or something like that? Right, okay, so can the multiverse exist and not exist at the same time and in the same respect? I don't know. I mean, who knows what the laws would be in different multiverses. Right, but if they had laws, then they couldn't have a law and not a law at the same time in the same respect. It can't exist and not exist at the same time in the same respect. We already established that you can't have nothing and something at the same time in the same respect. I'm really starting to feel like the laws of logic transcend, especially the law of contradiction, transcends all this universe and space and time and reality and something versus nothing. Like, this law still holds true, no matter if there's something or nothing. It can't be a product of the universe. I don't know. Okay, fine. Can God, because I know where this is where you're going. Can God exist and not exist at the same time and in the same respect? Huh? Doesn't that shoot down your whole stupid logical argument? Laws of logic dictate God's existence? Since you can't answer that, then I don't have to answer my question about the universe. It just simply is. Yeah, but here's the problem with what you're saying. See, God, by definition, if he creates everything, whether it's infinitely old or not or anything else like that, he would have the characteristic of omnipotence, which is a maximally great characteristic. So he would be omnipotent by nature. And that means, technically, he would be the source of all laws of logic. All the laws of logic would literally find their source in him. He would be that thing by which laws of logic would exist. That's really convenient, but I'm not seeing how that makes sense. Okay, think about it this way. So, if you have the laws of logic, law of contradiction, the only thing that could actually be a source for it that would be great enough to create it would be something with omnipotence, all power, literally all power, could do anything, make a square triangle. Okay, if you're omnipotent, you can do that kind of stuff. Laws of logic require omnipotence in order for their existence, in order for their application even upon nothingness and somethingness. If you don't have omnipotence, you can't have laws of logic. They are unexplained. They cannot exist. Oh, this is a weird argument. Yes, this is a weird argument. I hope that illustration was a little bit helpful. I'm going to try and break it down a little bit more because I find that this argument, while very powerful, can sometimes get confusing. So let's piece it together, piece by piece, and try and explain the moves that were being made here in this example little discussion. So the law of contradiction, or laws of logic in general, but I'm just going to stick with law of contradiction. The law of contradiction is something that is true. And the funny thing about it is that you can't say we made it, because before we existed or after we exist, they will not exist if we made them. So an atheist is not going to say that we made them, but they will say it's the nature of the universe. It's just simply the inherent nature of a universe or a multiverse of millions of infinite universes. It doesn't really matter. But the problem is if you say it's the nature of the universe, then the laws of logic, the law of contradiction, would stop existing the moment the universe stopped existing. In other words, if there was no universe to begin with, if there was simply nothing, mind you, if you're a physicist, you need to remember when a philosopher says nothing, he actually means nothing, as in no space, no time, no particle chances, quantum energy, it doesn't matter. No fields, no nothing. We mean literally no space, no time, no energy, no mass, no nothing. Zero. Just a big fat zero of every category. If you have that, can you have a nothing and something at the same time in the same respect? Can you have a universe and not a universe at the same time in the same respect? Can you have time and not time at the same time in the same respect? A theory, B theory people, stop looking at me right now. Even A theory and B theory of time, you still have the question of, can you have time and not time? Not time and timelessness. It's a whole different subject. But understand, even Stephen Hawking can't solve this one with the question of, can things pop into existence with a variety of different topics, never mind Hawking radiation and so forth. At the end of the day, the question is, can you have nothing, and something at the same time and in the same respect? And the answer is a logical big fat no, you cannot. It is a law of logic that cannot be violated. It's a law of contradiction. Even if you have a multiverse, trillions of universes, infinite universes, can you have infinite universes and nothing, or not infinite universes at the same time in the same respect? The answer is no. So if you have a law of contradiction that binds everything, and the universe itself, or reality itself, cannot account for it has not the power to do so, you still have to account for it. It still has to somehow fit within all of this. The world that we're in, the universe that we're in, the reality that we're in. Heck, even if you have nothing, you still have to account for the law of contradiction. And nothing has no explanatory power at all. So, Ultimately, the law of contradiction is undeniable. It is absolutely true. It will always be true. Doesn't matter if something exists or doesn't exist, unless an omnipotent thing, being, whatever you want to call it, says otherwise, or declares otherwise, or makes it otherwise. So if an omnipotent being decides something can be and not be at the same time in the same respect, well, guess what? Now that is the law. Because it's omnipotent. Omnipotence has consequences that everyone seems to not take seriously. Even Christians seem to not understand this concept, and it's shocking. For instance, I cannot tell you how many Christian philosophers will say, no, God can't do something other than his nature. God can't make a square triangle. That would be illogical. He can't do that. And I say, congratulations for not understanding omnipotence. Congratulations for not actually taking it seriously. So ultimately, this law boils down to, or this argument, this transcendental argument boils down to trying to demonstrate that something omnipotent has to exist in order to account for the law of contradiction. Now, does this mean I prove the Christian God? No, I think Van Til and Frame are wrong. You can't move to the only Christian God out of this, because the Muslim God would also work for this argument. Those are going to be historical arguments way down the road. But it does demonstrate that the atheist has no room in the atheist worldview for the laws of logic. Cannot account for them at all. In fact, you have to literally preclude them from your thought if you want to be consistent. But that is really fascinating, because aren't the laws of mathematics sourced in the laws of logic? In other words, if the laws of logic didn't exist, laws of mathematics don't exist either. If the law of identity doesn't exist, one is not one. If the law of contradiction doesn't exist, then 1 + 1 does not equal 2. Things of that nature. Now, I'm going to get a lot of hate mail from mathematicians who try and tell me otherwise, but no, logic is primary, not math. Shut up. But here's the thing. Science itself. You don't do science if you don't have the laws of logic. And if your worldview does not actually account for the laws of logic, then stop doing science. Science belongs to the theist, because the theist is the only one that has the explanatory power for why the laws of logic would exist. And therefore, well, stop doing anything in reality, because you can't even account for the basic stuff, the foundational stuff. It's a really neat argument. It's a really profound argument. And it's not subject to any scientific findings for or against, because science itself actually relies upon the law of contradiction, laws of logic, in order for science to even function in the first place. That's profound. Think about it like this. So in quantum mechanics, if you go and read a bunch of, well, nobody reads newspapers anymore, do they? But if you go and read a bunch of articles about quantum mechanics, they'll say a lot of crazy stuff that just can't make sense. For instance, particles pop in and out of existence on their own randomly. Particles will be in all locations, or all potential locations at once. That's kind of important, but whatever. All potential locations at once until you observe it, in which case you force it to locate to one location. Sometimes quantum computing can be described as a coin that is neither heads nor tails, kind of like binary. Instead, it's just like spinning on the tabletop, and it's neither and both at the same time, sort of. And it seems to violate the law of contradiction. In fact, I've heard this from a number of people. Not really scientists. Scientists kind of understand that they have their own specific language and the way that they use it. But the popularizers of science usually will mess this up and overstate what they're trying to say, not realizing that a bunch of other people who are not in this field of study misunderstand it and take it to a level at which it shouldn't be taken. And so suddenly a statement such as something can exhibit particle and wave functions, or two particles can be entangled and transfer information in a meaningful way faster than the speed of light, which is impossible. And they will say, see, aha, the universe actually violates the law of contradiction and laws of logic. And that's a really fascinating statement, because it sure sounds like what you just said was, aha, I proved the law of contradiction wrong, which would employ the law of contradiction and therefore prove yourself wrong by saying it. Because I have to ask the question, think about this. So let's take the example of particles can pop in and out of existence, seemingly for no reason at all, or a particle can exist in all locations, potential locations, until observed and then nailed down to one. Well, if it exists in all locations, and all locations at once until you observe it, doesn't that mean you violated the law of contradiction? Well, no. There's actually ways that you could explain this a little bit better that wouldn't violate the law of contradiction. But even never mind that. Never mind the probabilistic applications or mathematical equations that you get to that conclusion with. It doesn't really mean what you think it does. But let's just move past that and ask a very basic question. Did you use the scientific method to come to that conclusion? Is that a repeatable, testable truth? Because if you use the scientific method to come to that conclusion, if it's a repeatable and testable truth, aren't you already employing the law of contradiction? And therefore to say therefore the law of contradiction is wrong would be maybe the dumbest statement you could possibly make. Because that would be saying particles can exist everywhere at once. And by saying that, I'm wrong. So therefore I know nothing and everything at the same time in the same respect. All right, yeah. So this argument is fascinating. Absolutely fascinating, especially when you understand it and you kind of see where it's going. Because it really gets to the heart of the question of why do laws of logic exist? How do you explain it? Because if you can't explain it, then don't use them because they don't fit in your worldview at all. And really, if you don't have something omnipotent, you can't have these laws. They just always terminate in omnipotence. The end, hard stop, no way around it. So, let me know if you have any questions about this argument. Let me know what you think about this argument. Is it a profound one? Is it not a profound one? Are there obvious errors that are being missed in my presentation? Maybe there are. Let's hear about them. Thanks again for watching. I appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.